Hello, everyone. My name is John, and welcome back to the series. Now, in this video, we're going to be talking about Matthew chapter 24. We're going to be going over the Olivet Discourse. Now, this is probably one of the most hotly contested books of the Bible. There is just endless debates over Matthew chapter 24 because all of eschatology hinges on Matthew chapter 24. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through the Olivet Discourse, and I'm going to try to explain it in a way that I haven't seen explained before, because typically what will happen when people are going over the Olivet Discourse, they start at Matthew chapter 24 and 1. Well, we have to understand that Matthew chapter 24 and 1 is the culmination of a few chapters before that. So we have to go back to chapter 21 and start from there, because it's part of the scene that is set for Matthew chapter 24. So we're going to go back and start at Matthew chapter 21. So in Matthew chapter 21, 1 through 11, we find Jesus is entering into Jerusalem. Remember, he told his disciples to go find a donkey and loose that donkey and bring it to him. And he rode into Jerusalem on that donkey. Now, this is the fulfillment of Zechariah chapter 9 and 9, where it talks about Hosanna, the son of David, riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. This is a public, unmistakable messianic entry. So the entire city is stirred and the religious leaders are watching. So then Jesus goes into the temple. Now, up until this point, Jesus had many confrontations with the Jewish leaders. We're talking about the Pharisees, the Sadducees. He had bumped heads with them on many occasions. And if you will notice, if you read Matthew's book carefully, you will notice, or the synoptic gospels in general, that when Jesus is confronting these religious leaders, he is doing so as a teacher. He is reasoning with them. He is trying to walk them through the process of understanding who he is according to what the scriptures has said. I am the Messiah. They didn't understand that because he wasn't what they envisioned as being the Messiah. So he is teaching them. He is reasoning with them. But on the last week of his ministry in 21, when he is coming into town, this is a different Jesus coming into the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He is coming in as judge, jury, and executioner. So this is not one of those casual encounters. And he goes in and immediately he is turning over money changers. And he quotes Isaiah chapter 56 and 7. My house shall be called a house of prayer. And Jeremiah 7 and 11, you have made it a den of robbers. Because what the Jewish leaders had done is turn the temple into a lucrative business. Now, in my book that I'm writing, I talk about how these money changers, these people that were exchanging money, what they were doing, these religious leaders, what they were doing is they were charging a fee for you to exchange your currency into the currency you needed in order to pay alms. So when you came from a far country, if you brought an animal and that animal was rejected, then you brought that animal for nothing. So what the Jews were doing, if they had to travel to the temple, what they would do is they would just bring the money. But it wasn't the correct currency. So they would exchange that currency for the correct currency. That way you can buy an approved animal to have sacrificed. Oh, it was a very lucrative business. And this is what Jesus is confronting. And he is making it crystal clear, I am not here to reason with you. So for the next several days, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the lawyers are all coming at Jesus in waves. They are challenging his authority. They are testing him on taxes, the resurrection, the greatest commandment, all of these things. But then in chapter 22, he invokes a parable that is a theological setup for the events that's to take place. And that parable is the wedding feast. And we'll talk about that more in detail when we get to the parables itself. But what Jesus points to is a time that's in their near future, in which the king will send his troops and he's going to destroy the city and the temple. Well, you got to think about it. This is their money. This is how they're making their living. They are making a lucrative amount of money off the Jewish people in the temple. And he's telling them it's going to be destroyed. It's a parable about a specific set of events that's to take place. You've killed all the prophets that God has sent to you. Lastly, he sends his son and you kill him. Then the king sends his troops, keyword, his troops, and they destroy the city and burn the temple to the ground. Well, who is this king? Who are the servants? Who is his son? Who is his troops? And what city is he talking about? It's God himself and the prophets that he's sent to them. Who is his son? It's the one that's confronting them. Who are the troops? It's the Roman army. Who is the city? It's the one that they are in at that moment in time. And his troops destroy the city and burn the temple to the ground. This is 70 AD. This is a prerequisite of what Jesus is going to explain in detail to his disciples in 24. But I don't want you to miss what he says here. Listen what he says. He says the king sent his armies. His armies. So he is calling the Roman army his armies. Well, why is that? Because all throughout the Old Testament, when Jerusalem was destroyed, it was God using other nations to do so. But it's presented as if it's him coming to do it. It's no different than what Jesus is saying here. Judgment is coming, and the army that's going to do it is the king's army. But then we get to chapter 23, and we find the 7 woes. And woe number 1 is Matthew 23 and 13. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, because you have shut up the kingdom of heaven in front of people, and you do not enter in it yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Now, a key phrase in this that's often overmissed, I want you to see this. He says, you shut the kingdom of heaven in front of you. How do the Pharisees shut the kingdom of heaven? How do the Pharisees shut up the kingdom of heaven? How do they do that? Think about that. You lock the door to the kingdom of heaven and you won't go in yourselves, and you block the door so that no one else can go in. In other words, you have the keys to the covenant and you are using them to shut the people out and not bring them in. But then woe number 2, Matthew 23 and 15. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisee hypocrites, because you travel around the sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. In other words, you are shaping and producing proselytes in your own image and not the image of God as you're supposed to be. Why? Because your understanding of the Torah has been so warped and has strayed so far from its intent to it's unrecognizable. And now you are teaching people this. Does that sound familiar? Then woe number 3, woe to you blind guides who say, whosoever swears by the temple, that is nothing, but whosoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. You fools and blind men, which is more important, the gold or the temple that sacrificed the gold? In other words, you've created an oath system to determine which oaths are really binding and which one has a little bit of wiggle room. You are making that determination. You swear by the temple, but not by the gold. In other words, your theology gives you room to lie while at the same time looking to appear religious. This is what he is saying. Then woe number 4, woe to you, scribes and Pharisee hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. You tithe mint and dill, things which are practically worthless or meaningless. They are worth next to nothing, while neglecting justice and mercy and faithfulness. The Pharisees were so meticulous about tithing that they counted out individual tiny seeds from their herb gardens to make sure that they gave exactly 1/10 to the temple. Meanwhile, their expectations of you was a little bit different. Woe number 5, Matthew 23, 25, and 26. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside they are full of robberies and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first you clean the outside of the cup and the dish, so that the outside of it may also become clean. You clean the outside, in other words, the appearance. You want the appearance to look like it is clean, but inside is pure corruption. This is what he is telling the Pharisees. What he is telling them is you are pulling this off on the people of God who are innocent, people who just want to worship. But I see through it. I see through your schemes. Woe number 6, Matthew 23, 27 through 28. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous to the people, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lewdness. Inwardly. In other words, the people can't see that, but I can. They see what's on the outside, what you show them. I see what's on the inside. And inwardly, you are a hypocrite. You want to talk about getting your clock clean? Yeah. Then woe number 7, Matthew 23, 29, 36. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous. And you say, if we had been living in the days of our fathers, we would have not partaken with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourself. You testify against yourself. It's a guilty conscience. Whitewash the tombs, but you are spiritually dead within. I mean, this is a bone-rattling dismantling of these Pharisees and Sadducees. I mean, it gives me chills just reading through the way he is addressing them. And then he announces his verdict in Matthew 23 and 30, 37 and 38. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stone those who have been sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. Now, what would desolate have meant to the first century Jews? The Greek word Jesus uses here is eremos, the adjective form of the same word family as eremosis, which we're going to talk about in the next chapter when we talk about the abomination of desolation. And that word desolate is key. It is critical to understand. So what would the word desolate have meant to a first century Jew? The Greek word Jesus uses here is eremos, and it is the adjective form of the same word family as eremosis, the abomination of desolation, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. But this is not just a vocabulary connection. For a first century Jew person, the word desolate is connected with the temple, carried the full weight of the Babylonian destruction. They would have immediately connected that to Nebuchadnezzar and the destruction of the Jewish temple in 586 BC, the time when the Shekinah glory departed from the temple and allowed the Babylonians to destroy Jerusalem. So they would have automatically made the connection to the first destruction of the temple in 586 BC. Just from that one word, desolate, the departing of the Shekinah glory from the temple and allowing it to be overcome by the enemies. The prophet Ezekiel watched it happen in Ezekiel chapter 10 and 11. It was a temple with God no longer there. It was abandoned by God, left to its enemies. So Jesus, the Messiah, standing in the temple courts, just told the Pharisees and everyone listening, your house is left to you desolate. God is leaving. The Shekinah glory is departing this temple. They would have recognized what that meant, but guess who else would have recognized it? Jesus' disciples, because they were there. They were listening. They understood what he just said. They know Torah. They know the scriptures. These Jews are raised remembering scripture, quoting scripture. They didn't have Bibles. They didn't have books. They had memory. From their youth, they memorized scripture. So they understood what he just said. Now, when we get to Matthew chapter 24 and 1, this is why I say this is something that's easy to be lost from the conversation. The setup leading into Matthew chapter 24 and 1. So when Jesus leaves the temple with his disciples, they still have this ringing in their ear. And so when they get up on the mount, it is no doubt that this is still ringing in their ear, what they just heard. And so when they point out the temple to the Messiah, it can sound like just a casual question. There is no doubt that what he just said is embodied in this question. You just said that the Shekinah is departing this temple. This temple? This beautiful temple? And Jesus says, yes. Yes. The Shekinah is departing this temple. This temple is going to be left desolate. Not one stone will be left up on top of another that will not be thrown down. This is earth-shattering news to a Jew. The temple was their life. They knew nothing else but the temple. Two things that I think is just misunderstood by modern-day Christianity, and that is that for a Jew, they understood Torah like you and I know our home address. They know the Torah. They know the scriptures. And worship of God was their life. This was their entire life. And their commitment to it was undeniable. So to hear the Messiah say this thing is going to be destroyed is earth-shattering. So they come to him quietly, probably after they've gathered their nerves, they've absorbed what they just heard, and they ask him 3 questions. When shall these things be? When shall these things happen? What shall be a sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, for a lot of translations of the Bible, that end of the age is translated as end of the world. And a lot of the renditions of the Bible is straying away from that and calling it what it is, the end of the age. As I've mentioned many times before, the world doesn't end. It's the end of the age. And I find it ironic. If you ask somebody, and I have, what covenant are we in? And I'll say, well, we're in the new covenant. Well, why are we waiting for the end of a covenant that has no end? But that's another story for another day. But that end of the age is the Greek word syntalios tau ionis. Syntalios taios ionis, or the completion, full end, conclusion of a defined period, not an explosion or annihilation of the globe. It's not what we're talking about here. Ionos of the age is defined as a period of time, not the physical cosmos. The disciples are asking when their current covenant is going to end. You came to end it. He's told them, I did not come to destroy the law or the prophets. I came to end it. I came to bring it to its completion. Now, throughout the Olivet Discourse, you'll notice one thing. There's a recurring theme, and that is that all of the addresses in Matthew chapter 24 is in the second person plural. Watch this. Matthew 24 and 4. Watch out that no one deceives you. Matthew 24 and 6. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Then you will be handed over to be prosecuted and put to death. So when you see the abomination of desolation, pray that your flight be not in the winter. At that time, if anyone say to you, see, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, then he says in Matthew 24 and 34, this generation will not pass until all of these things take place. All of them. All of this. So Jesus is preparing them for what's coming, but he is not telling them this is something 2,000 years away from here, that you don't have to worry about it. No, your. It's for them, this generation. And the urgency is to the point where if you're on the housetop, you don't even come back down to get a coat. You run. You get out. It's that urgent. It's imminent danger. In Matthew chapter 10 and 23, Jesus tells his disciples, when he sent them out to spread the gospel of the kingdom, if they persecute you in one town, flee into another. You will not have gone over the cities of Jerusalem before I return. His return is that close within their generation. So Jesus is not introducing something new. He is letting them know that this is something that's going to happen in their lifetime. I talk about in my video on, I think it's the third version of the Losing Your Salvation video, how Jesus is warning his disciples against false prophets that will appear before his coming in the last days. And he's warning them about it. So Jesus is walking them through the events, what to expect, what's coming up, leading up to the destruction of the temple that he just warned them about. Not one stone will be left up on top of another. He's warning them about it. And so he's walking them through it. But he gets to verse 14 and he says this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Once the gospel has been preached, the end will come. Where is it going to be preached? In all the nations. Who is going to be preaching it? Them, his disciples. Now, the Greek word is oikomene, all the world, because when people are trying to force their doctrine onto the text, they will make a word mean whatever they want it to mean, whatever they need it to mean to fit their doctrine. So world is the globe, is what they'll say. World is the globe, and surely the world's 2,000 years later hadn't been preached to all the globe. It makes no sense. But the Greek word oikomene, the whole inhabited world, in the first century uses referred to the known Roman world, not every geographic location on the globe. Luke uses this same word in Luke 2:1 for Caesar's decree, when he sent out the decree for everybody in the whole world to pay taxes. I can guarantee you people on the other side of the globe didn't have to pay taxes to Caesar. It was the entire Roman Empire. That was the world. That was the world they lived in. That was the world they were beholden to. That was the whole world, the way they understood it, not from our thinking of what the whole world is. Completely different culture. But now this gospel being preached in all the world, you'll find in the New Testament that it was fulfilled. It's not something 2,000 years later we're waiting to happen. We're not waiting on it. If you look at Romans 1:8, Paul, approximately 57 AD, now watch this. Your faith is being reported all over the world. Romans 10:18, their voices has gone out into all the world. Colossians 1:6, the gospel is bearing fruit and growing throughout the whole world. Colossians 1:23, the gospel that you heard has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven. Every creature. Fulfilling Jesus' word. This gospel will be preached in the whole world, then the end will come. So what the futurist teaches is four main things, or core teachings from a futurist perspective. Now, from where I sit, I look at it and I see all these future comings of Jesus Christ working from a broken system. They're all trying to make this thing work, which is why there's over 40,000 Christian denominations, because it's a broken system and we're trying to make it fit we're forcing this doctrine into the scriptures, and it's not fitting. And so there's a continuous revamping and switching stuff around, trying to make it work. But at its core, there are four main things that futurists teach, and that is a literal coming of Jesus Christ. Jesus' warning in Matthew 24:14 remains completely unfulfilled and points to an end time of a covenant that has no end. We're looking for the end of a covenant that has no end, because most all of them will say that we're in the new covenant. And what I've heard, some of them, like I forget Thomas Ice and his buddy, I can't remember his friend's name, but they teach a gap theory. Well, it's a gap. Well, we're in between the gap of the old covenant and the new covenant. The new covenant hasn't happened yet. Once the rebuilt temple and all of that, then we'll pick up right there at the new covenant. Completely unfounded in the gospel. Can't find that doctrine in the Bible. But the second one is a central antichrist figure. The event involves a antichrist, a single future world ruler. And this is going to be the guy that sets up the abomination of desolation inside the temple. A rebuilt Jewish temple, it requires a literal third temple in Jerusalem, with the Antichrist will desecrate a specific act. The Antichrist enters the temple, stops the Jewish sacrifices, and exalts himself above God. All of these doctrines, I don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to make fun of it. This is a serious business. And these doctrines are just completely made up out of whole cloth. None of them are founded. None of them can be substantiated with the Bible without distorting the word and making things mean that what they don't mean. But this is one that's pretty much inescapable. It's inescapable. And I want to take a look at it. And it's the abomination of desolation. And that word desolation, remember, we talked about in Matthew chapter 23, when Jesus, one of the last things he said before he left the temple is, your house is left to you desolate. Well, that's in the same word family as the word used here about the abomination of desolation. And this word desolation is eremosis. And it is a desolation, the state or condition of being made desolate. The word family, eremosis, is the noun, destruction, the condition of being laid waste. Eremu, the verb, to make desolate, to lay waste, to make empty or barren. Eremos, the adjective, which we talked about in Matthew chapter 23, rather. Eremos, the adjective, desolate, uninhabited, waste, empty. Now, when I discovered this, I made a video, and I had this in a video. But it cannot be overstated. This is something I'm going to be talking about a lot because I don't see it being expounded upon. I don't see this being put out for people to understand what's going on here, because this completely dismantles this idea of a future coming of some antichrist, which is part of the futurist theology. This completely dismantles it, because Matthew and Mark and Luke is the only three places you found the noun form of eremosis. And the first place is in Matthew 24 and 15, the abomination of desolation, eremosis, spoken through Daniel the prophet. Now I'm putting an identity to it, because Jesus is saying now, this is where I got that information from. It's from Daniel's book, Daniel's sealed prophecy, which Jesus is unsealing in Matthew chapter 24. It appears again in Mark 13 and 14, the abomination of desolation, eremosis, standing where it ought not be. And then Luke chapter 21 and 20, its desolation, eremosis, is near, replacing the abomination phrase with Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. So, of the three times that this word is used, it's the only three times in the New Testament. You will not find it anywhere else, except for these three books, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And of course, it's not found in John, because John doesn't have an Olivet Discourse. But this is the only three places that it is found. And so all of them, you know, it is the parallel verse. How do you know that? Because all three of them, when it's talking about the abomination of desolation, one, it's about Daniel's prophecy. But immediately after that, Jesus tells them, when you see that event, you flee into the mountains. In Matthew chapter 24 and 15, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, when you see that, my disciples, you flee into the mountains. When you see the Roman armies surrounding Jerusalem, the desolation, the eremosis is near, you flee into the mountains. So what Matthew and Mark does is it gives you the phrase, but it doesn't give you the definition. Luke gives you the definition of what the abomination of desolation is. He tells you plainly what it is. It's Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. When did that happen? 70 AD. Now, I was in a Facebook group and I was having this discussion with somebody, and it just blows my mind. And I explained this here. And so somebody and this and these people are it's not people's fault. I don't blame people because I was programmed by tradition, literally programmed. You couldn't tell me any. I rejected God Himself because of my tradition. God is showing me this, and I'm like, thank you, but no, no, I'm not accepting that. So I understand how it is to be programmed by the Christian matrix. We're caught in that matrix, and we can't see past anything that tradition has taught us. It's difficult to see past it. But I explained this and how that um, Luke defines them, and I talk about eremosis in these three chapters only, in these three verses rather only, and they're parallel to each other. And this lady, she says, okay, since I can see how the abomination of desolate, I mean the Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, the desolation of, that was the destruction of the temple. I think Matthew and Mark is talking about the Antichrist setting up a idol in the temple. And so it's like, are you hearing what I'm saying? Or are you really hearing what I'm telling you? Luke is defining what the abomination of desolation is, but because we have been so programmed to believe that there's a future antichrist, one of the four things that futurists teach, it's difficult for us to see past it. The truth blew right by her. It kept going. She never caught it. Luke is defining what it is. There is no other alternative to this. There's no other alternative. Luke is explicitly telling you what the abomination of desolation is that Matthew and Mark names but don't define. Luke defines it. It's the Bible defining its own terms. It's the Bible doing its own exegesis. It's impossible not to see that. There is no way around that. Now, the broader Greek biblical corpus, this same word is found that Jesus quotes. Remember, Jesus quotes the abomination of desolation spoken of by who? Daniel the prophet. He's telling you this is the source of our information because Daniel sealed his book, as we talked about in the video about Daniel. Jesus is unsealing it. But if you look at Daniel 9:27 in the LXX, the Hebrew shekutz shemim translated using eremosis. It is the Hebrew version of eremosis. And what is it associated with? The abomination of desolation. It's inescapable. Daniel 11:31, same phrase, same Greek word. Daniel 12:11, same phrase, same Greek word. And what all of these verses are talking about is the exact same thing. What are they talking about? What Jesus disciples asked him, the destruction of the temple and the ending of the old covenant economy. All of them. The abomination of desolation. The abomination of eremosis. The conclusion is inescapable. The abomination of desolation is Jerusalem being surrounded by the Roman armies that destroyed it in AD 70. So let's look at the false prophets. Matthew 24:23-26. Jesus told his disciples that false prophets will arise. Now, again, in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus warns his disciples about false prophets, people who look like men and women of God, but they're not. He warns them about that. But in Matthew chapter 24 and 26, it talks about the false prophets. And there were false prophets. Theodus led followers to the Jordan, claiming to be part of the waters, Acts 5:36, also referencing him. He is referenced in Acts. The Egyptian false prophet led approximately 30,000 followers to the Mount of Olives. This is documented. And this was before the fall of Jerusalem. Simon Bar-Giora presented himself as a messianic figure during the siege. This is while they were already surrounded by the Roman army. Now, I want you to think about what Jesus tells his disciples here. He tells them to flee into the mountain. And there's places that history records where the disciples fled to in the mountains. There were specific cities that they fled to. But I want you to think about this. Jerusalem was a fortified city. This thing was massive. It was massive. And the walls around that thing had some of the largest stones. We're talking about tonnage. You put one of them things on the back of a semi truck and it'll break the axles on it. They were massive. And so the Roman army, even though they were a superior army, they had primitive weapons. They didn't have the equipment to bust down this wall. They couldn't do it. So it's a natural inclination. If you're going to be attacked, where would you want to be? You would want to be inside the fortified city. This thing was a fortress. And as superior as the Roman army was, what they did not have is excavators and dynamite, backhoes to dig this wall up, to break it down. They didn't have that. They were actually building batter rams on site, trying to bust down that wall when they had them under siege. And so the natural inclination would be to run into the city. Now watch this. Pay attention to this. What Jesus tells some of his disciples. He says, if you're on the housetop, don't even go back down into the house to get your coat. You flee into the mountains. When you see this, if you're outside of the city, you flee into the mountains. You do not run to the fortified city, which would be your natural inclination. Why is he telling them this? Because that would probably be the first thing that they do, is run into the city. Defy logic and run into the mountains instead. And if your flight is in the winter, pray that your flight is not in the winter, because he know as a Jew, they'll die of frostbite before they travel on the Sabbath. Their loyalty to the Sabbath was non-negotiable. So he told them to pray that your flight is not on the Sabbath. But he's letting them know to flee because the king's army is there. The parable about the wedding feast, where the king sends his army and destroys the city and burn down the temple. Judgment is about to rain down on Jerusalem. When you see that judgment is about to rain down on Jerusalem, you need to get out. Flee for your life. You'd rather be cold, hungry, and thirsty and alive than to be caught inside of this city once it's under siege. This is what Jesus is warning his disciples about. So in Matthew 24 and 29 and 31, but immediately after the tribulation in those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. This is Old Testament apocalyptic language. It's describing the collapse of a covenant and a political system. Isaiah 13 and 10 describing the fall of Babylon. The sun and the moon were darkened. Babylon fell. Babylon being describing Jerusalem. Isaiah 34 and 4 through 5 describing judgment on Eden. Stars falling. Eden fell. The stars did not literally fall out of the sky. Ezekiel 37 and 8 describing judgment on Egypt. The sun darkened. Egypt fell. The sun was not literally darkened. Amos 8 and 9 describing judgment on Israel. Sun goes down at noon. The sun did not literally go down at noon. Peter quotes Joel and this cosmic imagery in Acts chapter 2. I want you to look at this. So Acts chapter 2. And it shall be in the last days, God will pour out his spirit on all mankind, and he will display wonders in the sky above and signs on the earth beneath, blood, fire, and vapor of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and glorious day of the Lord comes. Now, what is Peter describing? And he points over there and he sees these Jews from around the empire, the Roman Empire, who have come to Jerusalem. He sees them endowed with the Holy Spirit and speaking in other tongues. And he says, this is what you are witnessing. It was the imagery, but these things were not happening literally. But that's what the scripture says. That's what it says was happening. Even though all you see is me speaking in other tongues. Now, if you hear people from different states or different countries, they have an accent. You've heard people speak with an accent, and their accent is fluid. For me to be try to talk Australian, it's not authentic. Or Louisianan, it's not authentic. Or New York, it's not authentic. Have you heard someone from New York talking about walking the dog? It's very fluent. It's unique. What Peter is saying these people are witnessing is these people are speaking in tongues that is not their original language, and they're doing so fluent. You can't fake it. This is the outpouring of the Spirit, but it's being described in this apocalyptic language. That's what's happening here. Now, after laying everything out to his disciples about the three questions they asked, which is, when will this be? What should be a sign of your coming and the end of the age? He tells them in Matthew chapter 24 and 34, he says that this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things happen. Now, this Greek word almi is the strongest negative construction in the Greek. It's the strongest negative construction in Greek. Not simply, no, Jesus is using the most empathetic negative available to declare with absolute certainty, this will not happen. It will not happen. What will not happen? The genea hauta, this generation, the demonstrative pronoun hauta, pointing to a specific present generation being addressed. This generation will not, all me, pass away until all these things take place. With the greatest possible negative construction in the Greek, Jesus declares with absolute certainty that the generation of people he is speaking to will not come to an end before all the things he has described in the Olivet Discourse happens. They will not pass away before all of this happens. It's impossible for this generation. He is demonstrating the impossibility of the people who he is speaking with passing away, or the generation he is speaking with passing away before everything he just pronounced happened. It will not happen. But of course, if you have a future coming of Christ, doctrine, this word generation is not saying what it's saying. So the alternatives, these are the alternatives that I've heard. Alternative number one, generation means a race or ethnic group. But the Greek word for race is genos. So he had the words to use if that's what he meant. It's an entirely different word. Matthew uses genea 9 times, and not once does he use genea for ethnic race. Not once. The next is generation means generation that sees these signs, which would make the entire statement meaningless. The generation that sees the signs will not pass away, as if it's possible for a dead generation to see them. Obviously, the people that see them hasn't passed away. This is what's called a tautology. It's something that just doesn't make sense because you're saying the same thing about something. I'm going to come pick you up at 3 a.m. in the morning. Well, obviously, 3 a.m. is morning. So what's the purpose of adding morning to it? Makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. The generation that sees these things will not pass away. And then the third alternative is all of these things refer only to the preliminary signs. There's more to come. That generation will see it, but there's more to come. And people will split 34 and 35 and make 35 something completely different. Another entirely new coming. It just doesn't work. Now, the Olivet Discourse is the most debated passages in the New Testament because the stakes are so high. Jesus meant what he said, and if he meant what he said, which obviously he did, then the futurist doctrine or their eschatology would completely collapse. So we have to do some word gymnastics in order to make it fit, and it just doesn't fit. But when you read the Olivet Discourse and put it into context, it's obvious that Jesus is speaking about events that's going to happen to his disciples and that generation, his coming, the ending of the covenant, and the establishment of a new covenant in that generation. I hope I've laid everything out for you and made it clear. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll answer any questions you have. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Thank you. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.